Welcome to another episode of the Strong Family Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm joined again by Mel, who will read us in here shortly. But on today's episode, we're going to talk about the critical relationships in a household that need to be maintained. Mel, go ahead.
Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising confident, independent, and resilient children in a strong family environment. Almost had it.
As we get into the relationship podcast, let's talk about our relationship with the viewers, the listeners. We are on YouTube as well. How do you think we're doing in the last couple of times to take a little breather? So we've done so many of these episodes now. We're putting out 7 all in a row. We took a little evaluation break on episode 3. How do you think we're doing now on a scale of 1 to 10?
I think we've upped it a little bit.
What do you think we've been able to improve?
I think being relaxed and just kind of talking back and forth and not feeling so scripted, even though we're not really scripted.
And I agree with that. And something that's helped, we put out these little clips of these on Instagram, which you can check out the link down in the description, Official Strong Family Co. on Instagram. And people have been commenting and reacting, and that engagement really gives us a lot of momentum. I know I've said it in the first few episodes, and you do hear it on a lot of podcasts, so it's something that does fade into the background, but we need to bring it to the foreground. Here's the rule of the show, and it really does help us out and you out. The rule of the show is that when you hear something that is valuable, you pause the episode, you write that down. You also write it in a comment, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're at. Write it down and comment with it so we know what you are enjoying and what has been helping you out. If you come across any questions later in the episode after you get back to it, post those as well. Those interactions make us feel like we're not just sitting in front of some cameras with a bunch of lights on us, that we're actually interacting with parents. And that'll keep the momentum going, and it'll keep the content coming and the value for you as well. Mel, we're going into relationships today. This one was one of the bigger revelations I've had as a parent, because when I watch like a parenting show or a parenting podcast or a parenting website, there's some great value out there, but they're usually highlighting things that you do to the children. Here's how you get your kid to do X. Here's how you teach them Y. And it seems like it's parents on one side of the table and kids on the other side of the table. And I think that's a dangerous mindset in terms of having a household that runs smoothly. And that's why this is the Strong Family Podcast. It's not the Strong Kid Parent Podcast, not the Strong Parent Podcast, but the family is the whole unit and the major relationship that's in your house that needs to be maintained. I like to bring in some business analogies. Usually when I talk to a business manager or boss and I'm trying to help consult for them and teach them how to elevate their staff, they come in with a mindset like, I'm the boss, they're the workers. It's me up here, them down there. I need to learn lessons to make them fall in line with what I want. Not a great perspective in the workplace. And sometimes it's easier just to think of it outside the household. In the workplace organization, you are a unit. You all succeed based on the relationships you have and the work that everyone does. Same thing in a family.
Yes, I would agree.
All right, I guess I'm back on.
No,
I think people will think I talk too much. What are your
I will
thoughts?
explain. I will happily hop in. So we see the family as one big unit, one big relationship. But then we need to break it down into the multitude of relationships within the family. And that's what part of what this whole section is about. So, for example, each individual in the family is on their own a relationship with themselves. So self-talk, the story they tell themselves, how their individual life is going with their interests and talents and all that. So we in our family have 5 people. So we have 5 individual relationships that we all need to look out for and foster. And then on top of that, we have 3 boys. So there's the relationship between siblings. So all 3 of them together, and then each of them as a pair. So that's another set of relationships. And then we have the child and parent relationship. So it's each parent to each child. So it could be Joe with Henry, me with Logan. So there's a whole bunch there as well. And then there's the parent relationship, so between myself and Joe. And I think that's the one that really got us thinking about this as an important piece of the path, because you and I started taking walks. And I think without that, that kind of was the impetus for this whole thing. Would you agree?
I would agree. Here's the critical mindset shift. It's not parents and kids is the only relationship in the household. Mel did a great job laying out a bunch of them that we have in our household. Now, based on the quantity of people, the number of parents, the number of kids, it's going to vary based on the household, but the concept is still the same. Think of the relationships you have in your household as a bigger picture item. So you have your family. That's one relationship that Mel mentioned. The relationship between the parents is something that a lot of people are familiar with because they think, well, I need to go out and recharge and we need to get our date night so we stay connected. At least that's on some people's minds. And on other people's mind, they go, the relationship between the parents takes a backseat and they put all their energy into the kids, and the kids eventually graduate and the parents are now in a household by themselves and they realize they spent 20 years not connecting. And so that relationship is strained. The relationship between my parents growing up was strained just like that. They said very clearly, once the kids are out of the house, we're going to get a divorce. Like that was the story we heard growing up and was true, because they weren't, the relationship between them became strained because they were focusing too much of their energy in different ways. And so we want to bring that to the forefront. We do know about that. We're going to dive into each one for about 3 minutes each, 4 minutes each here in a second. That one you're familiar with. You're familiar with whole household, family. You're familiar with the relationship between the parents. The ones that a lot of people are missing are the relationship between everyone in the household and themselves. The critical question is, how do I view myself? And then as the parent, you need to think and put yourself in someone else's shoes and say, my son Logan, how does Logan view himself? What can I do to help and improve that? How does Henry or how does Everett view, what is their personal view of themselves? I see so many kids struggling when I go into the school, and I know you volunteer at the schools more than I do, but the kids seem so lost and they seem like they lack self-confidence, and it's because they have a negative self-view. The stories they're telling themselves in their head don't align with something that's going to be a positive outcome for them. And I think that one's going to be missing. Let's slow it down a little bit. Let's go with the easy one, the relationship between the parents. And so how do parents, Mel, how can a couple of different strategies, because we're all a little bit different, how can they take care of the relationship between the parents? Because, and I'm going to jump back in one more time,
Okay.
because this is something you told me, and I agree with. The parents don't exist to serve the children. It is the parents' love that brought the children into the world. And so that relationship between the parents is still paramount.
Yes, and I want to make a distinction. So we are parents, but we're also a married couple outside of that. I mean, it's all intertwined, of course, but we have to take care of ourselves as a couple and also ourselves as parents. So when we do have discussions, it's not always about the kids. I mean, a lot of it is, but we have to make sure that we remember that the stuff that we enjoy and that we want to talk about that might not necessarily include the kids is still important. So some strategies. So Joe and I started taking walks together. A 45-minute walk every day. Now, 45 minutes might sound like a lot, and that's what works for us. But I think it's important to find some time in almost every day, if not every day, to spend some time together. Time to have a discussion, time to discuss anything that came up in that day. And I think, well, maybe what will make this more, make more sense is if I compare it with like date night. So a lot of parents say, yeah, that's what we do for date night. But to us, date night, there's a lot of time that can fall in between. What if it's 2-3 weeks in between date nights? What if you have to get a babysitter? What if you have to spend money on a dinner? So a lot of times it's almost more stressful to try to plan a date night than to try to find 15 minutes in a day just to kind of connect and talk. So our strategy that has worked well for us has been taking a walk, because I think being out in nature is helpful, getting out of the house is helpful, and it gives us time to talk uninterrupted. And I understand that when you have little tiny ones, you can't necessarily do it as easily, but we used to take Everett in a stroller with us as well.
I am going to squish some excuses because I understand that it is certainly harder at different times of life. There's no doubt about it. I'm not minimizing that at all. It doesn't make it any less important to solve, though, and figure out. It's not something you can get to later on. So if that means putting someone in a stroller and taking for a walk, if it means walking around your yard while they're in a swing during their nap, walking around the house, but it's drop everything and pay attention to this relationship. And so there are ways to do it, and I do have empathy that it is hard at certain ages, and especially with different age kids all over the place. We have that, but it's still important.
It is, and it's time invested in this relationship because, like Joe mentioned, eventually the kids will be independent and leave the house, and we want to have invested in us so that we don't feel empty when they go.
Oh yeah, we'll still be laughing, holding hands, dating, all that stuff.
I mean, most important for us is we have fun together. We play, as we say. So finding that time, designating that time is really important. And the other piece of this that I think sometimes gets misunderstood is some people might say, well, they might tell their kids the way we want to explain it to the kids. You might say, oh, I need a break from you, so we're going to go for a walk. We really don't. This is not punitive. We don't want the kids to feel like it's a punishment to them that we're leaving for a little bit. It's more, we want the kids to understand, and this is important for their future partners, that relationship is important. We want them to see us putting time and investment into us, into the parent relationship. Am I making sense? I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And our kids are in the room. They're helping us out. Logan's doing the camera work. Henry's taking notes because they come on second, do a kids version of the podcast, a reaction video. And this isn't something I wouldn't say in front of them. I love my kids and I want them to be successful. That doesn't mean I'm going to check everything else in my life and drop it to serve them. And that would actually, well, it feels good in the moment to try to do everything for your kids, kind of like a snowplow parent pushing all the problems out of the way with a huge time investment. That doesn't serve them in the long run. That gives you some feel goods in the short run. Look at what a great parent I am. However, we're sacrificing these other relationships to a level that sometimes you can't come back from. And so there's nothing I wouldn't tell the kids. I want them to be successful. They need to see me be a loving husband. I think that will help them be successful.
I agree. That's really important to say. And the other piece that makes this special for us is that we then have the time to talk about parenting strategies, to laugh about something that happened that day. And it kind of gives us time to plan. I think we probably came up with the idea and discussed it, the idea of doing a podcast on a walk. We came up with the idea to move across the country on a walk. A lot of the things...
Came up with the idea to homeschool the children instead of do a year of virtual learning when everything went online. It was the same value from this time of connecting is similar to what we have mentioned in the family meeting episode, where you need to have a lower heart rate time to make critical decisions. And so if you have it on the regular basis, it's not like one meeting where you need to solve everything. It's all right, let's just nudge it a little bit forward because we make this time for our relationship to hear each other out and solve things together. One more thing on the husband-wife relationship. We mentioned it in the morning routine episode. Sometimes you can't control what happens in the evening. You talked about the challenges around date night. If it's critical to you, you got to make it happen. You guys can figure it out. It's not critical to us because I don't like to spend time driving in the car and then get medium food at somewhere away. And so I could have spent that time doing the opportunity cost of that time is too high for me and my personality. I start acting out in crowds. Like I don't want to go out on Friday and Saturday. There's too many people out there. Yeah. Okay, they got me all flustered. Just even thinking about it. But instead, it was, we mentioned the morning routine night, we decided to set our alarms earlier because that is time we can control. And so we get up earlier to read together, write down our daily to-dos. And it's not like a huge conversation time, but it could be if we have something to talk about. So we have manufactured that time intentionally.
And also, I think one way that we realize that particular relationships needs tending to is you'll feel it. So, for example, in recent weeks, our kids all kind of got sick one at a time. So Henry's home for a day, Logan's home for a day, Everett's home for 5 days. And all of a sudden, we neglected our walks. To some degree, when Everett's home, we can't go for a walk because he's too little. But we realized, why are we feeling disconnected? Why are we feeling a little more stressed out lately? And then it kind of hit us like we haven't taken a walk in a couple of days. And that's usually our time to decompress and discuss. So we recognized that our relationship needed some tending to. And I think when you have this mindset about the various relationships in the family, you can look for which one is struggling, which one needs a little bit more help this day or this week.
We can empower them with some critical questions at the end, and I think you hit one there. Start with yourself. Say, what relationships feel strained in this household, and take a few quiet minutes to work on it. Let's shift to another relationship. Let's go with kids to kids. So there's another relationship. If you have more than one, they have a relationship between children. How are they treating each other? What are the words they're using? What's their tolerance for the other person? Are they have an extra short fuse this week? Is something to keep an eye on. Are they more standoffish? Are they always reacting in a negative way when the other person's in the room? If you see those things happening, that's a relationship that you need to invest some time in fixing. It's part of your family dynamic.
So an example of this one, a couple weeks ago, I noticed that Logan and Henry and that's the 13 and the 11-year-old, sorry, Henry, just had a kind of recent birthday. They were bickering a lot, and it just seemed like more than usual. So I noticed that because of this mindset that we're trying to foster. I noticed that I'm like, there's a strain here between these two, because normally this isn't really happening very much between them. They get along pretty well. So I sat them down and we worked on one of our communication tactics, I suppose, or skills, where each person has a chance to explain what's going on. The other person has to restate it, and they're allowed to clarify anything that's misunderstood. And this is probably a good podcast topic on its own. But they were able to come to an understanding of where they were each coming from. We came up with a compromise, and then we repaired that relationship. It's not always that quick, but just the fact that we were looking out for which relationship was strained at the moment, that I was able to jump in and say, okay, right now we need to deal with this, because relationships are super important. They're one of our core values, wanting to be together.
And you can see the investment Mel put into that with our weekly commitments. From the goal setting episode, Logan was selfless enough this week to set a commitment to play soccer with Henry because he knows that's important to his brother. And they've been very selfless about that. So he wants to do something, and that is strengthening that relationship. So I was super excited to hear that that's what he chose. And so this constant gentle pressure of reminding them, hey, you do have to care about the people around you. And I will, again, try to take it away from the family because it's easier to understand some analogies, but consider your workplace. If you work in the same department as other people and you sit around and you argue all day, how much of a low achievement group are you going to be? It's got to be fixed. And so it's your job as the leaders of the family to address it, fix it, apply some constant gentle pressure. I hate when I hear parents say, oh, that's just how it is with kids. They bicker. Like, that's how it is with your kids if it goes unaddressed. And yes, it's not perfect. They will still bicker. It happens, and they do. I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
that's okay. We try to have the mindset of always looking for opportunities. So I could have just, threw my hands in the air and yelled at them for bickering. But I because of the mindset we're trying to have in this family, I thought to myself, okay, here's an opportunity. And then also our 5-year-old witnessed that, and then he's learning from it.
And I will give them both a compliment one more time. The older two definitely adore the younger one. They love him very much. And today I saw Logan read him a book. I see Henry try to teach and play soccer with him because he knows if Everett learns soccer, then now he's got an extra soccer buddy. That's a smart move. And so they maintain their relationships because it is in their self-interest, but it is in the family interest too. And so it's not just a we'll get in trouble if we don't speak respectfully thing, but having those slightly deeper conversations to get the kids to understand how it benefits them to have good relationships in the household.
Sounds good.
You want to shift?
Yes. Okay, so we covered parent relationship. We covered between the children, and we talked a little bit about the individual. So now we're going to move on to parent-child. And this can be, again, this is like both parents with each kid, each individual parent with each individual child. And because we focus also on the individual relationship, meaning the person with themselves, we understand that each kid in our family, including Joe and I, we all have our own personalities, our own talents, our own skills and interests that we try to foster. So that feels like a side note now that we're talking about the parent-child. But I think what I was trying to get at was that when you know what your kid is like, you can better parent them because each of them need a different kind of attention. So one kid might be more cuddly. One kid might need to have those 10 minutes after school to talk about what happened because they have to get it off their chest. So they all have their own way. Like, for example, I pick Logan up from school to kind of avoid the bus ride home just because it's a long bus ride. And I feel like that's when kids can misbehave on the way home from school. So I pick him up, and that gives us 10 minutes where he may want to discuss something, he may not. But I like opening up that opportunity for him to talk because he did transition to middle school this year, and that's a big shift for a lot of kids. So I try to make sure to take care of him in that way because he's my middle schooler now and might need that. Sometimes I notice Henry likes to take walks individually with us, and then he opens up and talks with us out on a walk. But I think this was kind of a revelation more recently for us where we realized, we might need to spend some individual time with each kid because as they're growing, they have different needs. I spend a lot of the time with the little one. Everett still is very attached to me as like his mommy because he's only 5 years old. And I enjoy that time, but I also understand it from this mindset of that's what he needs right now.
I think it's really critical to respect the relationship that the child has with the other person as well. I see too much bickering between parents. It's almost like competitive. Like, oh, the kid, I do this with the kids. Why don't you do this equal amount of time? They love me more. Like, it starts to really strain at the relationship between the parents because they feel slighted or they don't have the emotional maturity to deal with things like you're mentioning. Like Mel does most of the evening debrief, and the kids get their hugs from her in the morning, and eventually it was slightly getting too far out of balance. And I mentioned during Tough Truth at the family meeting, like, hey, I would like to see you guys before you go to bed. That's important to me as a father. And I know I'm not as huggy, and it wasn't a knock because I love everything that Mel does. I don't want it to replace anything, but as, hey, I want our relationship to be maintained. And so they came in and they gave me a firm handshake before bed, and we joke around because they thank mom for a lot of things. Hey, Dad, thanks for the lights today. I really enjoyed being able to read my book. I'm like, you're welcome, boys. Like, we have a good laugh together because that's the kind of relationship that is suiting for us. So it's all different based on your own personalities and dynamics. But my word of caution is don't get petty with it in the household.
Right. We can't take it personally when a kid. Go ahead.
I saw a funny meme that was sent to me by buddy Adrian. It was a Ric Flair. It was saying, woo, like, how does it feel to be second best? And like underneath it said, when a toddler chooses to cuddle with the dad one time.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
Yeah, and usually I don't like the parenting. That was funny because it does highlight like needing the maturity to deal with it. Like you wouldn't celebrate like Ric Flair, but I don't really care for a lot of the parent humor because I think it normalizes behaviors that aren't helpful to the families. But that's a whole nother discussion. Well, but I just wanted one more thing, Mel. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I just want to give that clarity to the listeners because we're throwing a lot of information out. And I know it can be like drinking from a fire hose, and perhaps you're thinking, well, it works for them. Will it work for me? There are critical questions, regardless of our own personality types and the number of kids we have and our dynamic in between them. But there are some commonalities, which are asking a question on who has the strained relationships, not being petty about it, and understand it's a balancing act between all of these relationships. So there's a lot going on that is true for every family, regardless of our individual situation.
Yeah, that's important to clarify. What example that came to mind was Everett, the 5-year-old, will come in and he's like, Mommy, I want a hug. And then Joe will be in the room and Joe's like, what about a daddy hug? And he's like,
I joke about it. He'll say, Mom. I'll say, Dad. And he'll just like walk, he'll look at me like try to shuffle by him. Like, can I help you with something? It's not, he doesn't need me right now, and I'm not going to detract from the relationship between his mom. I just do it in a joking way to give him some constant gentle pressure and a reminder that I'm there for him when he does need it too, which does occasionally happen. If you have an example.
I do. So recently one of our kids came home with this paper from school saying that their class was going to watch a video about puberty. And this can be a sensitive topic in a lot of families. And I've talked to them about it before because I always wanted them to like know information before they heard it from kids or something. And I was like, well, you could talk to me about it. It's okay. And he looked at me and he was kind of like, this was actually during the evening debrief, which is why that piece of this path is so important.
And a little background, Mel is a social worker that has done counseling and it does have expertise in this. So that's why it's important to dial in and listen.
So during the evening debrief, when the kids are comfortable and sometimes topics from the day will come up that didn't come up during dinner or whatever, my son said to me, he's like, I don't really feel comfortable talking to you because you're a girl. And now I could take that personally and I could say, wait. You can talk to me about anything. We've talked about this stuff before. But instead, because of this relationship mindset, I thought to myself, you know what? He's getting older. He might need his dad more, especially for topics like this. So instead of getting upset about it, I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm not offended. If you need to talk to daddy, that's great. So then I think it was the next day that I mentioned it to Joe, and I said, I think our son might need to talk to you a little bit more because he's not comfortable talking to me about this. So I recognized the strain was between me and my son, where not in a bad way, but he needed something that I couldn't necessarily give him. So then I discussed it with Joe. We have a good relationship to talk about all these kinds of things. And then I said, I think you might need to make a little bit more effort with him around this topic. And then things went really well after that.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. It reinforced the relationship that we had, that it was the right time to have those kind of conversations. And I think that the big picture, a couple of takeaways are, you can't be everything to everyone. You'll end up being nothing to nobody. You'll burn yourself out. It is a recipe to burn out if you try to manage every relationship in the household by yourself like it's a single player game. And also, if you think of high functioning organizations, I'll pick one. We'll choose an orchestra, something I have no personal relationship with, it having the talent to be able to do. It wouldn't sound that great if everyone played the same instrument and played the same role at the same time. It would just all be kind of this lukewarm same thing. It is all the instruments that complement each other, that go together. On the football field, something more in my wheelhouse, like, you need players that play certain positions, and we have different roles in the household as well, and we want to be strong in certain ways for that conversation. Like, I was ready for it and was the right person for the job in that moment, and Mel is certainly the right person for the job in a lot of other moments when they come up, and having a mutual respect about that.
Yeah, and this also, I think one of my strengths, and we all have individual strengths, is to notice when one of the relationships is strained. So, and then Joe and I will go on this walk like we do almost every day, and then I could bring it up. So I think it's the awareness that these relationships are happening and that they're all important, being able to notice them if something's off, and then being able to do something about it. Because at the end of the day, I really want my kids' needs to be met. So if I can figure out, okay, something's not right over here, how can we problem solve? And versus just ignoring it and letting it fester.
Let's slide on to the last set of relationships to talk about, one of the last relationship sets to talk about in the household, because I don't want to go too far over time. Mm-hmm. This is a meaty topic. There's a lot here that we really want families to dive in on and just shift mindset and just be more aware of these types of things in the household. But I don't want to go too long because it's going to be too much information at once. And so this set of relationships is everyone to themselves. What is your internal view of how you're doing? Are you burnout? Are you pouring from an empty cup? Do you need a little recovery time? Do you have more energy where you can chip in and give someone else a little bit of a breather? Is there an opportunity where you can pick someone else up in the household as you see their momentum or personal view wane? Is there a conversation that you can have with someone in the household to talk about what is the story they're telling themselves about their lives in their head? Part of the value of the goal setting, as we weave this all together, and that's a critical episode for you to listen to, is that they see where they're going. They're writing the story. They're the hero of their story for the year, and you're helping them, guide them towards achieving it. That goes a lot towards self-confidence and their personal view. And so for me, it's sometimes I get burnt out. Like it's a lot, and I might have to speak to them and say, Mel, I just need like a quiet couple hours, because that's how I recharge. There's a lot going on with this podcast launch, and the kids chipping in and doing their own podcast version, and plus my regular roles and my business consulting, and just a lot. And it's important to manage that. I have some good people in my life that do kind of the pick me ups and show me gratitude for the work I've been able to do for them, which I'm very thankful for. That helps me recharge as well.
And I think you touched on something very important about advocating for yourself. So when you notice that you have this, that you need some time to yourself, you're able to tell me that, and we can plan for that. So just being able to teach our kids to advocate for themselves, oftentimes this is something in school too. Let's say you're struggling with a subject, you need to talk to the teacher. Being able and learning how to communicate and advocate for your individual needs is super important. But even on like a daily basis, so a silly example this morning, not really silly, but I was getting ready to go to church, and I had like a bunch of things to do, and Everett's chasing me around, wanting me to read him a book. And of course I want to do that, but I have like 5 minutes before we have to head out the door. So I thought to myself, you know what? You've got 2 brothers over here. They could help me out. So I was feeling overwhelmed. That was my internal story, was like, I have to be ready, and I was getting frustrated, but I also want to help Everett. So I simply asked Logan, can you please read Everett this book? And he did. And then immediately things rebalanced.
That's a great point. Asking yourself the question, what resources do I have that can help me out right now? We were very busy a few moments ago and say, hey, Logan, can you set up all the lights and all the cameras for the podcast? Because I need a minute to breathe before I go on, or else I won't give my best self to the listeners and the viewers. And he handled it all. It was speaking up and knowing that there's help. The roadblock, and what I want to caution you on avoiding, is when it gets so heated and you just kind of blow up. I just need a few minutes to myself. Like I've heard that from parents. I've heard that in my households. Not a great place to be at. That's not really the time to try to solve it, is when it's just gone past that point of no return. So take a breath, look at the resources around you, and make a call. It takes practice. This isn't easy to do, and I haven't always got it right myself, but it is a game changer once you start using it regularly.
Yeah, I think being able to adapt the mindset and the understanding that these relationships all exist, simply learning that is a piece of the skill. So once you know about it, then you can move forward and act on it in a more timely way.
Mel, we've been chatting here for almost the full 30 minutes. I can't see the clock, so I'm going to say it feels like about 30 minutes. Go by my feelings and emotions. What else do you have to say on relationships so we can land the airplane?
Well, I'd like to think that all families feel that the relationships that are in their family are the most important. So, and I know that's how we feel. So we want to invest most of our energy and time into raising these kids and into keeping our relationship strong. So I think that's, again, focus on what's most important. And are you giving the time and the energy into the relationships that truly matter? Or are you taking your time, your precious time, and wasting it on relationships that might not matter?
I'll give you 3 questions to end with. Little journaling time for you. First question, how are the relationships on a scale of 1 to 5 in my household? And so you just go through and rank them, parent to parent, child to child, each individual. So you have a couple of lists down. And then below that, ask yourself the question, where do I want these relationships to be in 30 days? Write that out. And it might be just one of those relationships you talked about earlier, 2 out of 5. Like, okay, like I want this to improve. I want this person to build self-confidence. So you've identified some areas for improvement. You've identified what success looks like, which is critical. And then the last step is, what am I going to do to help them reach that success in the next 30 days? That time period that is specific needs to be longer than a day or 2. Give yourself some time to work with it. I say the words constant, gentle pressure all the time because it tends to work best versus like, let's sit down and have a heavy talk about this once a year and just hope it's all better. Like, it takes daily little nudging. And then at the end of 30 days, see if you're successful. It'll take a lot of stress out of this versus saying, oh, this person my relationship's strained with my wife. My relationship's strained with my husband. Okay, well, what does success look like? We got 30 days. What can we do to get there? And let's put some time into it. So there's some very actionable things that you can go ahead and do.
Yeah, way to break it down.
Last couple sentences, Mel, anything for them?
Have fun with it. I think if anything, anything new that you're trying to implement can feel stressful. However, I think you will see the results when you shift your mindset and try to identify these relationships that need some help. They can only get stronger, I think, if you take on that perspective.
I like this yin and yang relationship. You get to talk more of the emotional side, like, hey, have fun, enjoy yourselves, go dance in the rain. All
which
things
we've done.
people could. We ran in the rain. We didn't dance. We raced.
You ran and you wrestled with the kids.
There was no dancing. It was serious. No. Okay. And then on my side, I like to solve problems quickly because I don't like to fester around problems. Here's the strategies I'd like you to try out. You should visit strongfamilyproject.com because we created the resource for you and the handout to help guide you through this process to make your lives easier. Spend 30 days working on it. Shoot us an email or a comment on how it's going and what questions you have. That is the path to success. Like, we can't pave it any smoother for you at this point because when you get on it, there will be surprises and there will be things that come up and it will take a little bit of effort. Like the old saying is, it's not easy, but it's simple. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean easy. And I have a lot of respect for that because we're constantly working on it with our kids. So there's your path forward. We'll give you the strong family path. We've given you these podcast episodes, and that lets you focus on the real work and the real hard stuff, which is going in and trying to parent with it and then asking for help if you need it, because things will come up. And I understand that is much more the harder thing to do. So less energy on what's the strategy. You have it now, more energy on execution and see what you can do with it.
Yeah, I'm excited for everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. If you found value in it, please stop by, follow, subscribe, drop us a 5-star review if you think we delivered that for you, and share the podcast. There are a lot of people out there that could benefit from this kind of information, and it would be pretty cool of you to help them out and say, hey, here's a couple of resources for the parents. Just post that, tag some people in it. I appreciate you listening. I'm looking forward very much to the next episode. Talk to everyone soon.